The war in Ukraine will end at the end of 2026. This is stated in a letter from European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to the leaders of EU member states. As noted in the document, when preparing the funding option for Ukraine for the next 2 years, the European Commission is guided by preliminary IMF forecasts. In October 2025, the European Council committed to providing funding for Ukraine's needs in 2026 and 2027, including military and defense expenditures. On November 17th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and French President Emmanuel Macron signed a historic agreement. As the Ukrainian leader stated, this document gives Ukraine the opportunity to acquire 100 Rafale F-4 aircraft by 2035, 8 SAMP-T air defense systems, radars for the air defense systems, air-to-air missiles and aerial bombs. Joint projects between the countries' defense industries will also begin, and interceptor drones will be produced. French President Emmanuel Macron announced that Ukraine will become the first country where the SAMP-T system with enhanced capabilities will be deployed. Macron also announced that the headquarters of the coalition of willing forces has started operating near Paris.
The goal is to deploy forces to guarantee security away from the front line after a ceasefire and to support Ukraine in regenerating its armed forces in order to prevent new aggression.
The President of France emphasized that since May 2025, Ukraine has shown a desire to end the war, while Russia continues to refuse negotiations. According to Macron, everything is ready to move towards a ceasefire, but no one believes Moscow is actually seeking peace.
Turkey has called peace in Ukraine inevitable. The war unleashed by the aggressor country Russia is reportedly close to ending. This opinion was expressed by Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan in an interview with A Haber. According to Fidan, for 3 or 4 years there were forces that did not want the war to end. However, even they are now beginning to change their position.
Now even those who did not want it to end are starting to think differently.
The head of the Turkish Foreign Ministry also noted that the war has turned into a war of attrition, where no one is truly winning and both sides are suffering enormous human, financial, and political losses. Fidan expressed confidence that diplomatic efforts remain paramount and that a peace platform can be established, including in Turkey.
We believe that a peace platform will be created. Personally, I believe in it, either in Turkey or somewhere else. But I believe that peace is not only necessary but also inevitable. Unfortunately, I can't disclose the details for obvious reasons, but I believe it will happen.
At the beginning of November, Fidan suggested considering Ankara as the venue for the next round of negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow. After all, the first direct talks in 3 years between Ukraine and Russia, which also involved the US and Turkey, took place on May 16th in Istanbul, just like the initial talks to end the war in February-March 2022. At that time, the so-called Istanbul agreements were signed, which were essentially ultimatums from Russia that, as President Zelenskyy stated, Kyiv did not accept. Later, Trump's special representative for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, emphasized that the Istanbul agreements could serve as a starting point but could not be the basis for peace in Ukraine. It is noteworthy that, against the backdrop of peacekeeping initiatives, Ankara is becoming an increasingly important geopolitical player. The West now needs Turkey no less than Turkey needs the West. This is noted by Bloomberg columnist Mark Champion, who analyzes how the position of Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan has strengthened on the international stage. Moreover, Donald Trump sees the Turkish leader as a key mediator in resolving Russia's war in Ukraine. At the most recent meeting, the US president called the president of Turkey one of the leaders who could help resolve the war.
He is respected both in Ukraine and in Russia. Putin respects him, and he is my friend.
At the same time, Ankara does not want Moscow, its rival for dominance in the Black Sea, to control even more ports and coastline, so it has quietly helped arm Kyiv. The Turkish leader himself has stated that Crimea should return to Ukraine in accordance with international law.
On November 17th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy signed an agreement with French President Emmanuel Macron on strengthening Ukraine and intentions to cooperate in the acquisition of defense equipment. Immediately after signing the agreement, the President of Ukraine announced that Ukraine intends to purchase 100 Rafale aircraft from France.
The document gives our country the opportunity to acquire military equipment from the French defense industry. A technological base including 100 Rafale aircraft by 2035 for Ukraine's combat aviation, air defense systems, radars for air defense systems, air-to-air missiles, and aerial bombs.
The president of Ukraine announced that already this year, joint projects between the defense industries will begin.
We will jointly produce interceptor drones. We will work on developing critical technologies and components that can be integrated into Ukrainian drones.
Earlier, Zelensky stated that the agreement with France would be historic.
We are preparing deliveries of other powerful air defense systems and strengthening our aviation.
Reuters reported that this agreement concerns the supply of air defense systems, military aircraft, and missiles. According to the agency, this is a 10-year strategic aviation agreement that will provide Kyiv with Rafale multi-role fighter jets. In October, Macron announced the provision of more Mirage fighter jets to Ukraine, as well as a new batch of Aster-30 surface-to-air missiles. Zelensky also confirmed that Ukraine may soon receive additional Mirage 2000 aircraft from France. The corresponding decision has already been made. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha called on partners to move from a support Ukraine as long as it takes approach to a support as strongly as possible approach, in particular by funding drone production in Ukraine. According to the minister, at this stage of the war, it is important to achieve two goals: to abandon our own illusions and to deprive the enemy of theirs. He noted that the head of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, will be forced to end the war against Ukraine when he stops believing in the possibility of victory on the battlefield and when the cost of continuing the war for the Russian Federation exceeds the cost of ending it.
The collective international community has enough means to force Russia to end this war. We need to move from the approach of as much as needed to as much as possible.
Sybiha noted that the modern arms race is not about nuclear weapons, but about millions of cheap drones.
For this, rapid and sufficient funding of Ukraine's defense industry is needed, as it is currently the largest source of defense innovation in the world. We can produce up to 20 million drones next year if we receive adequate funding.
The Czech organization, A Gift for Putin, plans to provide Ukrainian defenders not with one Flamingo missile, but two. The money for them was raised by the Czechs. It is worth noting that as part of the fundraising for the Flamingo in the Czech Republic, citizens donated a total of 16 million crowns. That's about $760,000. Manufacturers are ready to supply Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles. If US President Donald Trump gives a positive signal on this matter, said Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky, according to him, there is a chance that the head of the White House will agree. Zelensky also noted that negotiations are underway not only regarding these ballistic missiles, but also about other long-range systems.
The Russian offensive in the Zaporizhzhia, Dnipro, and Donetsk regions has accelerated in recent weeks, the Telegraph reports. Taking advantage of the fact that Ukraine has concentrated its main forces on the defense of Pokrovsk, Russia is advancing in southeastern Ukraine, putting the strategically important cities of Orikhiv and Huliaipol at risk of being encircled by Russian troops. Analysts believe that holding back the Russian offensive in this sector of the front is crucial for the defense of Zaporizhzhia. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine notes that the main task of the defense forces in the Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia regions is defense and the destruction of enemy reserves. In the Pokrovsk direction in the Zaporizhzhia region, Ukrainian troops continue their defensive operation, conducting search and strike actions in certain areas.
The main objective is to destroy the enemy and its reserves, undermining its offensive potential. During the fighting, 39 occupiers were eliminated. The total enemy losses amount to 60 people. The invaders also lost 16 pieces of weaponry and military equipment.
Overall, the situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction is under control. The enemy will now try to cut off the Ukrainian armed forces' logistics along the route between Huliaipol and Pokrovsk, according to the commander of the Typhoon National Guard Special Drone Unit, callsign Boyko. He said that, as of now, reserves have been brought in and consolidated forces are operating in the area to stabilize the situation. Footage has appeared online showing Air Force aviation destroying a bridge that the Russians are trying to use to establish logistics to support assault troops near Huliaipol. There is no encirclement of Pokrovsk yet, Ukrainian defenders note. Urban combat continues throughout the city to prevent the enemy from advancing and gaining a foothold. The fighters are trying to prevent the enemy from reaching and cutting off the Mir-Norad highway. At the same time, Ukraine's defense forces have pushed the enemy back near Shakov in Donetsk region. This was reported by the Ukrainian monitoring project Deep State. Their Telegram channel also notes that the enemy has advanced in Vladimirovka and near Sofiyivka in the Donetsk region. In the Dobropilya area, drone operators from the 1st Corps of the National Guard of Ukraine Azov showed how they destroyed a tank and a lot of other equipment. Over Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region, Russian occupiers are gradually losing control despite Putin's claims that Ukrainian defenders are surrounded. However, the situation in the city is difficult for both sides due to complicated logistics. This was stated by Viktor Trehubov, head of communications for the Joint Forces Group.
There was no such situation then, and there isn't now. Moreover, there is a trend that the Russians are gradually losing control over the city, over the areas where they used to be. These are the northern districts, where they entered and tried to gain a foothold. But there are fewer of them there now as a result of effective countermeasures. It can't be called a victory yet. For now, it's an ongoing process.
Moreover, Putin's soldiers have been ordered in Kupiansk to simulate control over the city by waving Russian flags in places where their small groups are present, which makes it easier for Ukrainian fighters to locate them. This was reported by the Joint Forces Group of the Ukrainian Armed Forces on Facebook. In the Kherson region, the Russians are trying to push the defenders out of their positions near the Antonivsky Bridge. They carried out assault actions 3 times over the past day, said Vladislav Voloshin, spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, during a television marathon broadcast. He noted that the occupiers launched strikes with 40 unguided aerial rockets at the village of Otrada Kamenka, which is located on the right bank of the Dnipro River. Voloshin added that the Russians had been actively shelling Kherson with artillery the day before. The number of firefights in Pokrovsk is increasing. The enemy has intensified attempts to infiltrate Mirnohrad. This was reported by the 7th Air Assault Corps. Since the beginning of the month, defense forces have eliminated 314 Russians in Pokrovsk, with another 71 wounded. According to the soldiers, there have been sightings of Russians north of Pokrovsk. Several enemy infantrymen tried to infiltrate and establish themselves at one of the agricultural facilities. The enemy was eliminated, Ukrainian soldiers report. It is noted that the enemy aims in the short term to reach the settlement of Ryshin, which is northwest of Pokrovsk. Due to their inability to break through Pokrovsk's defenses and use the city as a staging ground for this plan, the Russians are trying to bypass it. At the same time, the enemy continues its unsuccessful attempts to pin down the defense of Mirnohrad. At the same time, the armed forces of the Russian Federation may attempt to block Ukrainian forces within the city of Pokrovsk in Donetsk Oblast in order to prevent Ukraine from conducting an organized withdrawal, which would negate the potential operational effect of a future capture of Pokrovsk by Russian troops. This is stated in a report by analysts from the Institute for the Study of War. Simultaneously with the blockade, the occupiers will attempt to encircle Ukrainian defenders in the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad area from the west. Although the invaders fighting in the Pokrovsk direction have suffered some of the heaviest battlefield losses in recent months, the Russian command is making every effort to complete the capture of Pokrovsk. Although the timing and operational consequences of these seizures remain unclear, the Institute's report says. American experts note that the occupiers may try to use vehicles to transport troops, likely under the cover of fog, to speed up the clearing of Pokrovsk itself. The situation in the city remains very difficult.
On the night of November 18th, an explosion occurred in the suburb of Omsk in the village of Rostovka, Russian Federation. A powerful fire broke out on the local gas pipeline. According to local residents, the flames shot up to about 40 meters high, and there is a chemical smell in the air. The regional governor, Vitaly Kodsenko, claims that the cause of the explosion was an accident on an underground section of the main gas pipeline during repair work. At the same time, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation has not reported any downed UAVs in the Omsk region. During the night of November 18th, drones attacked 2 main thermal power plants in the occupied part of Donetsk region. According to local telegram channels, the Zuyevskaya and Starobeshevskaya thermal power plants were hit. Subsequently, the head of the occupation administration, Denis Pushilin, confirmed the attack.
The Zuyevskaya and Starobeshevskaya thermal power plants were damaged, leaving many settlements without power, which caused boiler houses and filtration stations to shut down.
Reports online state that as a result of the attack, Donetsk, Makivka, Ilovaisk, and other settlements lost power. Meanwhile, it has become known that the Saki thermal power plant in temporarily occupied Crimea was damaged as a result of strikes by Ukrainian defense forces. According to OSINT analysts, satellite images show significant damage to part of the main building at the energy facility. The strike may have occurred several days ago. Explosions in the Saki area occurred on the 13th and 16th of November. A strike on the Saki thermal power plant in temporarily occupied Crimea also took place on the 14th of November. At that time, damage was visible on the equipment of one of the chimneys. An assassination attempt was allegedly being prepared against the former Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and now the current Secretary of the Security Council, Sergei Shoigu, at one of Moscow's cemeteries. According to the intelligence services, the perpetrators installed hidden equipment, a camera placed in a flower vase on the grave of Shoigu's relatives, to monitor his visits to the cemetery in preparation for a subsequent assassination attempt. According to representatives of the Russian intelligence services, the organizers of the assassination attempt allegedly recruited a group of perpetrators, which, according to their version, included 2 Russian drug addicts, a migrant from Central Asia, and a man supposedly from Kyiv. In the typical Russian manner, accusations, as always, were directed at Ukraine, and this case is no exception. However, if we recall the story of the plane crash involving Yevgeny Prigozhin, analysts from the Institute for the Study of War, in particular, claimed that the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin almost certainly ordered Prigozhin's plane to be shot down. In August 2023, shortly after the Wagner Group's attempted mutiny, the plane belonging to Wagner PMC owner Yevgeny Prigozhin crashed in the Tver region of the Russian Federation. All 10 people who were on board died. Among them was Yevgeny Prigozhin himself. Meanwhile, political analyst Taras Berezovets suggests that this was Shoigu's way of trying to attract the attention of dictator Vladimir Putin and return to the position of Minister of Defense. This whole phantasmagorical story so far resembles a very poorly staged farce. Let me repeat once again. Obviously, nothing will work out for Shoigu in this case. In May 2024, dictator Vladimir Putin removed Shoigu from the position of Minister of Defense and appointed him Secretary of the Security Council of the Russian Federation. At that time, the replacement of Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu was linked to the high level of corruption in the ministry and among officials close to Shoigu. Ukraine is preparing to restart negotiations to end the war, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced. The Ukrainian leader stated that on November 18th, he will hold a meeting in Spain.
Today, there is a meeting in Spain that we have been preparing for a long time, and we expect that another strong country will help even more to protect lives and bring the end of the war closer.
Zelenskyy emphasized that every day, there must be tangible results for Ukraine in relations with its partners. He also reported that on November 19th, meetings will be held in Turkey.
We are preparing to intensify negotiations, and we have developed solutions that we will propose to our partners. Bringing the end of the war closer by all possible means is Ukraine's top priority. We are also working to restore exchanges and the return of prisoners.
In addition, the president instructed that preparations be made for the Supreme Commander-in-Chief's staff meeting on November 20th.
Of course, this week there will be relevant discussions with officials and a meeting with the leadership of the Verkhovna Rada and members of the Servant of the People faction. I am preparing several necessary legislative initiatives and decisive, swift actions that our state needs.
Meanwhile, it has become known that U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, will arrive on November 19th in Turkey to meet with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Earlier, the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov, announced that Ukraine and Russia are resuming negotiations on a prisoner exchange under the Istanbul format. According to Umerov, this concerns the release of 1,200 Ukrainian citizens. The head of Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Hakan Fidan, believes that Russia's war against Ukraine is at its closest point to ending. The minister considers negotiations between the countries to be inevitable.
No one can move anywhere. Only those who disregard losses are advancing. The war must end. We consider negotiations to be inevitable. This could happen in Turkey, it could happen elsewhere, but I believe that this peace will definitely come.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban also said that Russia and Ukraine are very close to achieving peace. U.S. President Donald Trump, in an interview with GB News, expressed confidence that Russia's aggression against Ukraine will end soon.
In Slovakia, people took to the streets to protest against Prime Minister Robert Fico and his pro-Russian stance. This was reported by the Associated Press. Protesters chanted, "Enough, Fico! We want change and resign." People gathered on the anniversary of the 1989 Velvet Revolution, which overthrew communist rule in the former Czechoslovakia. It is noted that rallies and marches took place in dozens of localities. Fico's government angered its people by cancelling the national holiday on November 17th, which commemorated the Velvet Revolution, calling it part of austerity measures. Michal Simeka, leader of the largest opposition party, Progressive Slovakia, rejected this explanation.
This has nothing to do with the economy or saving money. Robert Fico simply wants to tell us that the holiday of freedom is useless, that freedom itself is useless. We value freedom and we will not allow it to be taken away from us.
Recently, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico also got into trouble during a meeting with high school students in Poprad. He provoked a protest from the students by saying that those who support the war can go to Ukraine. His words outraged the high schoolers, after which the students began jingling their keys and then stood up and left the hall altogether. One of the students was carrying a Ukrainian flag. It should be noted that this is not the first such incident. At the beginning of November, Fico was supposed to speak at one of the Slovak schools, but the students drew a heart in the colors of the Ukrainian flag, as a result of which one of the students was questioned by the police. Fico's speech was then cancelled. Robert Fico, known for his pro-Russian policies, has long been a controversial figure in Slovakia. Thousands of people have repeatedly taken to the streets to protest against his policies. This has never happened before. A Z channel reported that Ukrainian ballistic missiles hit Voronezh. On the afternoon of Tuesday, November 18th, powerful explosions rocked the Russian city of Voronezh.
Guys, we're being bombed. There are two. Come on. Where's the third one? Hold on. There's the third one in the cloud. Damn. There's another one over there. There were 5.
Residents from different districts of Voronezh reported sounds resembling air defense systems in operation and the wail of sirens. Videos showing smoke in the sky and missile trails quickly spread on social media. According to the Telegram channel Shot, the air defense in the Voronezh region shot down at least 6 missiles. The overflights were allegedly recorded from the Kyiv region. The shelling was carried out using multiple launch rocket systems. The Z channel fighter bomber claims that the city was attacked by Ukrainian Hrom-2 ballistic missiles. Russian air defense allegedly repelled the attack, but there is no confirmation of this. The Ukrainian Defense Forces have not yet commented on the possible strike on Voronezh. If the report about the use of the Hrom-2 is confirmed, it will be the first instance of this system being used against targets on Russian territory at such a distance. Previously, Ukrainian ballistic missiles of this type have not been recorded in open sources. Over Russian cities located hundreds of kilometers from the front line. Voronezh is located about 250 kilometers from the nearest Ukrainian positions, which fully matches the stated range of the Hrom-2. Hrom-2 is a Ukrainian operational tactical missile system with a solid fuel ballistic missile developed by Yuzhnoye Design Bureau. It has a strike range of up to 500 kilometers. The launcher, mounted on a 10x10 chassis, carries 2 missiles. The system is capable of carrying either a high explosive fragmentation or a cluster warhead. At the same time, the General Staff announced that the Ukrainian armed forces had successfully used ATAK-MS missile systems to deliver a precision strike on military targets within Russian territory. The General Staff did not specify exactly where these missiles were used.
The administration of US President Donald Trump is secretly consulting with the Russian authorities while developing a new plan to end the war in Ukraine. This was reported by Axios, citing US and Russian officials. According to sources, the new plan consists of 28 points, which can be divided into 4 categories: peace in Ukraine, security guarantees, security in Europe, and the future of US relations with Russia and Ukraine. One of the White House representatives told the publication,
"The president has made it clear that it is time to stop the killing and reach an agreement to end the war. Trump believes there is a chance to put an end to this senseless war if flexibility is shown."
The publication reports that the drafting of the document is being led by Trump's special representative Steve Witkoff, who discussed it in detail with the Russian ambassador Kirill Dmitriev. Dmitriev told the publication that he spent 3 days in Miami communicating with Witkoff and other members of Trump's team. According to him, the Russian opposition has supposedly been heard. Axios also writes that Witkoff discussed the plan with the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Rustem Umerov. As is known, on November 19th, Volodymyr Zelensky will hold a meeting with the leader of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. According to the head of the Ukrainian state, the discussion will focus on achieving a just peace. Zelensky noted that he has good relations with the president of Turkey and also stated that there are signals from the United States which they will discuss. Earlier, Politico reported that high-ranking Pentagon officials arrived in Kyiv with the aim of resuming peace talks to end Russia's war against Ukraine and deepening cooperation in the field of military technology.
High-ranking Pentagon officials have arrived in Kyiv with the aim of resuming peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. According to Politico, the American delegation includes U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll and Chief of Staff General Randy George. Starting from November 19th, they have scheduled meetings with the Ukrainian military leadership, officials, and the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. At the same time, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky has traveled to Turkey to meet with Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The leaders will discuss achieving a just peace. According to Zelensky, they will also discuss signals about peace talks coming from the United States of America. However, it is currently unknown who will participate in the upcoming negotiations on behalf of the aggressor country. As political strategist Taras Berezovets notes on his YouTube channel, the main representative of the Russian delegation, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, has in fact been removed from the negotiation process. The Kremlin's special envoy Kirill Dmitriev is also in a weak position.
Kirill Dmitriev also ended up in a bad spot as a result of his American trip, and it's unclear whether he still has the mandate to conduct negotiations with anyone. But meeting with Zelensky is not appropriate for his status. To put it mildly, he is not on the same level as him.
Berezovets believes that even Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff will not want to negotiate with him because previously he had spoken directly with the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin.
Clearly, this is not the level of person with whom Steve Witkoff would conduct negotiations. Of course, this would be flattering for Kirill Dmitriev, but let me repeat once again, Witkoff will not stoop to that level.
Meanwhile, in Europe, there is a determination to further increase pressure on Russia to end the war. Earlier, French President Emmanuel Macron stated that, in his opinion, peace can be achieved before the year 2027.
On the night of November 19th, explosions rocked Russia's Krasnodar region. According to Telegram channels, drones once again attacked the Zelenskyy oil refinery. This plant was previously attacked on September 7th. Amid the strikes, Russia's Federal Air Transport Agency reported the closure of the Gelendzhik and Krasnodar airports. As is known, the Zelenskyy oil refinery is among the leading oil processing companies in the southern federal district. In particular, it produces fuel oil and diesel fuel. In addition, according to the Telegram channel Astra, a missile alert was declared in several Russian regions. Later, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that supposedly 65 drones were shot down overnight. Of these, 16 UAVs were over the Black Sea, 14 each over the territory of Voronezh region and Krasnodar Krai, and 11 drones were allegedly shot down over Belgorod region. And in the temporarily occupied Crimea, the Russian authorities are worried about the fate of the Crimean Bridge. According to the Telegram channel Crimean Wind, 2 anti-sabotage boats, Grachonok, and an artillery boat, Shmel, are guarding it from the Black Sea side. Apparently, the occupiers are strengthening the security of the illegal structure due to the regular successful strikes by the defense forces on military targets on the peninsula. In addition, footage has appeared online showing the successful operation of drones and missiles from the Ukrainian company Firepoint, which are even more capable of bringing the collapse of the Crimean Bridge closer. The FP-1 drone can hit targets at a distance of up to 1,700 kilometers, while the FP-5 Flamingo missile can strike enemy targets at a distance of up to 3,000 kilometers.
Ukraine and Poland have agreed to create a group to prevent Russian sabotage. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky held talks with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. They discussed the recent acts of sabotage on the Polish railway. The Ukrainian leader noted that Telegram was used to organize subversive activities and launch a disinformation campaign against Ukraine.
Our information matches. All the facts point to a Russian connection behind all of this. No one but the Russians is interested in this. Ukraine is ready to cooperate with Poland at various levels and share all information.
Zelensky stated that the Ukrainian company Ukrzaliznytsia has implemented proper measures to counter such acts of sabotage. The section of the Warsaw-Lublin Railway where the sabotage took place is of strategic importance for assisting Ukraine. This may be one of the routes through which military aid from Western partners is delivered. The incident occurred on November 16th at approximately 7:39 local time near the village of Zhylichi in the Masovian voivodeship. The railway tracks on this section were damaged as a result of the explosion. At the scene, law enforcement officers found a camera as well as a second explosive device that did not detonate. The explosion on the tracks may have been triggered using mobile phones. In Poland, the sabotage on the railway was called an unprecedented act of sabotage, which bears all the hallmarks of a hybrid attack by Russian special services. At the scene, Prime Minister Donald Tusk made a statement.
There is no doubt that we are dealing with an act of sabotage. The explosion was most likely intended to derail a train that travels along a route also used for transporting weapons to Ukraine.
Later, law enforcement officers discovered a Russian connection in the case leading to Ukraine. And on November 18th, during a speech in the Sejm, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk accused Russia of sabotage.
We are certain, not just assuming, that both incidents were deliberate, had their perpetrators, and their goal was to cause a disaster on the railway. The identified individuals are 2 Ukrainian citizens. They had been cooperating with Russian intelligence services for a long time.
According to the Prime Minister, they entered Poland from Belarus and managed to leave after the sabotage. He stated that Poland would demand that Belarus detain and extradite the suspects. In turn, Jacek Dobrzyński, the spokesperson for the Polish Minister Coordinator of Special Services, stated that the sabotage or terrorist act on Poland's railway tracks was organized by intelligence services from the east. In response to the Russian sabotage, Warsaw announced that it is closing the Russian consulate in Gdansk, the last one in Poland. The Kremlin reacted nervously to this.
Relations with Poland have completely deteriorated, and this is probably a manifestation of that deterioration, with the Polish authorities seeking to reduce any possibility of consular or diplomatic relations to zero.
The Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs also responded to reports about Ukrainians being involved in the incident in Poland. They noted that the source of such sabotage is Russia, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andriy Sybiha, expressed solidarity with friendly Poland in connection with the incident on the railway. Commenting on the explosion on the Warsaw-Lublin section, Sybiha suggested that this could be another hybrid attack by Russia aimed at testing the response. Crippling sanctions from the U.S. against giants Rosneft and Lukoil are reducing Russia's oil revenues, according to the U.S. Treasury Department. Ukrainian drones are systematically destroying the aggressor country's oil refineries, which will inevitably lead to the collapse of its oil refining industry. The sanctions imposed by the U.S. in October set a deadline of November 21st for companies to cease cooperation with Rosneft and Lukoil. Violators may be cut off from the dollar-based financial system. Meanwhile, the White House has announced its intention to present a new major peace agreement with Russia, which, according to officials, will put an end to the war in Ukraine. It could be reached as early as this week, according to Politico. A senior White House official stated that a framework document to end the war is expected to be agreed upon by all parties by the end of this month, and possibly as early as this week, the publication reports. According to Axios, the US and Russia are secretly working on a plan to end the war in Ukraine. The US plan consists of 28 points, and a high-ranking Russian official says he views it with optimism. As part of the White House's attempt to resume negotiations to end the war in Ukraine, Donald Trump sent a high-level Pentagon delegation to Kyiv for talks on November 19th. High-ranking American officials reported this to the Wall Street Journal. According to the publication's sources, Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, along with 2 other generals, was supposed to hold talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and other Ukrainian officials, as well as with representatives from military and industrial circles. In addition, Driscoll also intends to meet with Russian officials later. Another sign that talks of peace are near is Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy's visit to Turkey for a meeting with President Recep Erdogan. According to the Ukrainian leader, one of the key priorities of the trip is to bring the end of the war closer, as well as to resume exchanges and return Ukrainian prisoners of war. Zelenskyy says he is preparing to intensify negotiations to achieve peace. And according to him, Kyiv has solutions it wants to present to its partners. However, as the Western press reports, neither Ukraine nor America's European allies appear to have been involved in the development of the White House's new peace plan. It is also still unknown what solutions are being considered for the most pressing issues, such as Russia's seizure of Ukrainian territories or security guarantees for Ukraine. At the same time, the mood in the White House is optimistic, and it seems the plan will be presented to Zelenskyy as a fait accompli, the article says. As observers note, policymakers in the White House believe that, due to corruption scandals and the shifting frontline, Ukraine is in such a position that they can force it to accept this deal.
The occupiers continue their unsuccessful attempts to break through the defense of Pokrovsk, but are left with nothing. The situation in this sector of the front remains extremely tense. As reported by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrskyi, on his Facebook page, Ukrainian defense units continue to carry out their missions in the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad agglomeration area. According to him, during his trip to the Pokrovsk direction, he held a meeting with the command staff of military administration bodies, military units and subdivisions. As Syrskyi notes,
the enemy remains highly active, but the clear coordination and cohesion of our units help us to withstand their efforts. We clarified the results of defensive, search and strike and assault operations aimed at stabilizing the situation, as well as the procedures for carrying them out in the future.
Syrskyi added that the enemy continues to be destroyed both during attempts to move and in identified areas of concentration. In just the past 4 days in the Pokrovsk direction, the total losses of the occupiers amounted to 487 personnel, of which 350 were irrecoverable. In addition, the exchange fund is being replenished with captured Russian soldiers. Earlier, the 7th Air Assault Corps reported on its Telegram channel that, in the short term, the enemy aims to reach the settlement of Hryshyn, which is located northwest of Pokrovsk. It is noted that, due to their inability to break through Pokrovsk's defenses and use the city as a staging ground for this plan, the Russians are trying to bypass the city. At the same time, the enemy continues its unsuccessful attempts to pin down the defense of Mirnohrad.
Recently, in Mirnohrad, Ukrainian forces destroyed a group from the Russian Federation's GRU. Such enemy units operate in the second echelon after sabotage groups and oversee the execution of tasks by the first echelon.
Meanwhile, the head of the main intelligence directorate, Kirilo Budanov, explained why it was necessary for the GUR landing force to be deployed in Pokrovsk. In an interview with Channel 24, he said that this was the only way to turn around a very difficult situation in the city. Budanov noted that at that time, the chief of the General Staff of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov, had already reported to Putin that the city had been taken.
Nothing else would have worked. What we did allowed us to win precious time so that the main units of the armed forces could calmly, as much as possible, approach the city to reinforce it.
According to him, after the GUR special forces landed, Russia stopped talking about having taken Pokrovsk. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, as of 8 o'clock in the morning on November 20th, Ukrainian defenders had stopped 55 assault and offensive actions by the aggressor. Over the past day, Russian invaders suffered losses of 890 personnel. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, has approved a peace plan between Russia and Ukraine, which consists of 28 points. NBC News reported this, citing a high-ranking White House official. It is noted that this particular plan was developed by senior members of the Trump administration over the past several weeks, in consultation with Russian Special Envoy Kirill Dmitriev and Ukrainian officials. In particular, the document was developed with the participation of Trump's Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and the President's son-in-law Jared Kushner. According to the publication's source,
the plan is aimed at providing security guarantees to both sides. It includes what Ukraine wants and needs to achieve a lasting peace.
The publication notes that the document still requires discussion with Ukraine and Russia. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated on his X page that the U.S. is developing a proposed plan that takes into account the positions of both sides. According to him, in order to achieve lasting peace, both sides must make difficult but necessary concessions.
Meanwhile, details of the plan have begun to appear in a number of media outlets. According to the Wall Street Journal, the plan envisions significant territorial concessions to Russia, a renunciation of demands for the deployment of peacekeeping forces, and a rejection of NATO membership. The article notes that, according to a European official, this plan is likely to face strong resistance in Kyiv and among European governments. According to sources,
Ukraine will have to agree to forego membership in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization for at least several years. Kyiv will not be allowed to station international peacekeeping forces on its territory. In return, according to officials, Moscow pledges not to attack Ukraine or other European countries and will enshrine this promise in law.
Politico reports that the peace plan has already raised concerns among Ukraine's allies. They believe that the United States may give in to the Kremlin's demands. According to the source, the provisions of the plan remain the subject of negotiations. European leaders are also worried about granting Russia territorial concessions, which they see as encouraging Moscow's aggression and setting a troubling precedent. German Foreign Minister Johann Wedful noted,
All international partners continue to make efforts to finally bring President Putin to the negotiating table. Naturally, we support everything that contributes to this. We are focused on supporting Ukraine, and by doing so we make it clear to Putin that there is no alternative to the negotiation process.
Meanwhile, the Telegraph reports that, according to the plan, Ukraine is supposedly to give up control over Donbas, but will retain ownership rights. According to the publication's sources, Russia will pay an undisclosed rent for control over the region. The content of the new peace plan has already been commented on by the United Kingdom. As reported by Reuters, a representative of the country's foreign ministry stated that Trump's efforts are important, but Russia could end the war as soon as tomorrow by withdrawing its troops and stopping its illegal invasion.
Donald Trump decided to strengthen sanctions against Russia after the strike on a kindergarten in Kharkiv, CNN reports. According to the TV channel, this shelling became a turning point for him, prompting him to take a tougher stance toward Putin. The US president, speaking at the White House, also responded to Putin's statement that Western sanctions are not sensitive for Russia. Trump stated that in 6 months it will be possible to see whether US sanctions will affect the aggressor.
I'm glad he thinks so. That's good. I'll let you know in 6 months. Let's see how things turn out.
The day before, Putin stated that the new US sanctions supposedly would not have a significant impact on the Russian economy.
Yes, of course, they are serious for us, that's clear. And they will have certain consequences. But overall, they still won't have a significant impact on our economic well-being.
He added that US sanctions would negatively affect Russian-American relations. Putin also lamented that this was an unfriendly act and an attempt to put pressure on Russia. On the night of October 23rd, the US Treasury announced new sanctions against Russia in order to force dictator Vladimir Putin to come to the negotiating table with Ukraine. The sanctions targeted Russian giant companies Rosneft and Lukoil, as well as a large number of their subsidiaries. At the same time, Axios reports that Trump expressed deep disappointment in Putin. It reached a new level after a phone conversation between Secretary of State Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov on Monday. The publication writes that the US president admitted that negotiations with the Russian dictator regularly reach a dead end. Every Russian strike on Ukrainian energy facilities now immediately results in mirrored retaliatory attacks. Just in the past 24 hours, Russia has been hit at an oil refinery, an electrical substation, and a railway. On the night of November 20th, drones visited the Ryazan oil refinery.
Right before our eyes.
Look, there's smoke rising. Look, there's smoke rising.
Local residents claim that the Ryazan oil refinery has been attacked again. This is at least the 8th attack on the oil refinery since the beginning of 2025. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirmed the strike on the refinery in the Ryazan region. According to the agency, this refinery produces an average of 840,000 tons of TS1 aviation kerosene annually. Meanwhile, Russian frontline cities are rapidly plunging into darkness and cold. For example, in Rylsk in the Kursk region, a substation was hit. According to the head of the region, Alexander Kinstein,
As a result of the attack, more than 16,000 people in the Glushkovsky, Rylsky, and Koronevsky districts were left without electricity. Rylsk has already been connected to backup power sources.
Then these are shots from the Perm region.
These first 2 tanks, they flew off right away, you get it?
The ones in the ditch?
Yes.
The fire destroyed an entire train of tank cars carrying petroleum products on the railway tracks in the Sverdlovsk region. The cause of the fire is unknown. Representatives of Russian railways stated,
On November 19, 2025, on the Samara-Kordon section of the Sverdlovsk Railway, tank cars and a freight train caught fire. At present, measures are being taken to eliminate the consequences.
If previously the territory of Russia was mainly attacked by drones, now Ukraine is using its own long-range missiles, such as the Flamingo and Neptune, as well as missiles from its partners, for example, the American ATAK-MS. Russian military personnel personally witnessed their effectiveness the day before at their facilities in Voronezh.
Guys, everyone, we're being bombed right now. That's 2. Come on, there was a 5th one over there too.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine stated that on November 18th, they successfully used ATAK-MS tactical missile systems to carry out a precision strike on military targets inside Russia. This is a significant event that underscores Ukraine's unwavering commitment to its sovereignty, according to the Ukrainian side's statement. The use of long-range strike capabilities, particularly systems like ATAK-MS, will continue. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed the attack and reported that on November 18, 2025 at 14:31 Moscow time, the Ukrainian side used 4 ATAK-MS operational tactical missiles against the city of Voronezh. In addition, the Russian army reports the alleged destruction of 2 MLRS multiple launch rocket system launchers, which fire ATACMS missiles, and publishes photographs of fragments of ballistic missiles aimed at Voronezh. Military expert Yuri Fedorov, in one of his interviews, says that the potential target of the ATACMS strike, which was authorized by the US for the first time, could have been the Baltimore airfield in Voronezh, where the 47th Aviation Regiment of the Russian Aerospace Forces is stationed. Sources from the Ukrainian project Cyberboroshno claim that the missile strike had several targets. One of them is the Pogonovo military training ground, located near Voronezh, where at the time of the attack there was a concentration of Russian armed forces personnel. These images of the aftermath of the Russian attack on Ukraine have spread around the world. People are still being searched for under the rubble of a residential high-rise in Ternopil. The whereabouts of more than 20 people remain unknown. As of the time this report was prepared, 26 people are known to have died, including 3 children. Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrskyi, held meetings in Kyiv with a U.S. delegation led by U.S. Army General Daniel O'Driscoll, who is reportedly supposed to promote Trump's plan. According to media sources, President Zelenskyy has also already met with envoys from the U.S. president sent from the Pentagon. Following the meeting, Syrskyi stated that discussions with the American military focused on strengthening Ukraine's air defense capabilities and long-range strike capacity, as well as training personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine. Syrskyi explained to O'Driscoll that long-range strikes against Russia have proven effective in disrupting Russian logistics and reducing the military potential of the aggressor country. And strikes on Russian oil refineries significantly undermine the Russian economy. For his part, Shmyhal wrote that during his meeting with O'Driscoll, he expressed gratitude for the United States' support of Ukraine and assured him that Ukraine is a reliable ally of the United States. According to him, he presented O'Driscoll with Ukraine's developments in the defense sector, in particular the production of FPVs, interceptors, and long-range strike weapons. According to the minister, the discussion also focused on defense agreements between Ukraine and the United States. The new peace plan, prepared by the US and Russia, envisions meeting the Kremlin's maximalist demands, Ukraine relinquishing part of its territories, and giving up certain types of weapons. Journalist Michael Naki believes that this plan is the personal initiative of Steve Witkoff, which has already essentially fallen apart.
There are no objective circumstances for this. Russia has not taken Pokrovsk. There have been almost no real changes at the front, while tensions within the Kremlin itself are rising due to increasingly effective Ukrainian strikes and a worsening economic situation.
In Ukraine, a source said that Kyiv considers this plan absolutely unacceptable and will not accept it. Meanwhile, the Kremlin pretended that they had never heard anything about this initiative. Moreover, a trilateral meeting between Steve Witkoff, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan was supposed to take place in Ankara the day before. However, it was postponed when it became clear that Zelenskyy was not interested in discussing Trump's plan. At the same time, President Zelenskyy held a meeting with Recep Erdogan. The leaders discussed possible ways to achieve a peaceful settlement in Ankara. The president of Turkey called on Moscow and Kyiv to return to direct negotiations in Istanbul.
The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, recorded a video address to the Ukrainian people. It concerns the peace plan proposed by the administration of US President Donald Trump. The head of state stated that this is currently one of the most difficult moments in Ukrainian history. According to him, the country is under intense pressure. Ukraine may soon face a very difficult choice.
About the loss of dignity, or the loss of dignity, or the risk of losing a key partner, or the difficult 28 points, or a harsh winter, the most severe and far-reaching risks.
Zelenskyy noted that Ukraine is expected to give an answer, which he had already given during his inauguration, swearing allegiance to the country. The head of state said that he had pledged to defend Ukraine's sovereignty and independence and would not betray that oath. According to him, the national Ukrainian interests must be taken into account.
The national Ukrainian interest must be taken into account. We are not making loud statements. We will calmly work with America and all our partners.
Soon after, Vladimir Zelenskyy reported on his Telegram channel that he had a phone conversation with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and U.S. Secretary of the Army Daniel Driscoll. According to him, they discussed many details of the American peace plan. Zelenskyy noted that Ukraine, together with America and Europe, will work at the advisor level to ensure that the path to peace is viable. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump stated that next Thursday is the appropriate deadline for making a decision on the peace plan for Ukraine. According to the Washington Post, Washington is currently pressuring Kyiv to sign a peace agreement. However, the peace plan, prepared without the participation of Ukraine and Europe, contains many unworkable provisions. The article notes that it may take at least a year to agree on provisions acceptable to Ukraine.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, commenting on the US peace plan for Ukraine, stated that the Ukrainian authorities will not make any sharp statements and are focused on clear and honest work. The American side has provided its proposals, the points of the plan to end the war, their vision. From the very first days of the war, we have maintained one extremely simple position. Ukraine needs peace. And real peace is the kind that will not be broken by a third invasion. According to the Ukrainian leader, it is precisely these conditions that must be ensured. He outlined exactly what is fundamentally important for us, and we agreed that our teams would work on these proposals so that it would be genuine. We will not make any sharp statements and are focused on clear and honest work. Zelenskyy recalled that in recent days there have been many conversations with European leaders. We expect to speak with President Trump in the coming days. We understand that America's strength and support can truly bring peace closer, and we do not want to lose that. We also understand that Russia has no real desire for peace, otherwise they would not have started this war. There are many assessments, quite fair ones, that all year Russia has been trying to do only one thing, to delay sanctions and buy more time for war. On November 20th, the American delegation handed President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelenskyy a draft peace plan. A number of Western media outlets have revealed additional details of the so-called 28-point U.S. peace plan, which senior Trump administration officials led by Witkoff had been secretly developing over the past few weeks in consultation with Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev. The document allegedly provides for the transfer of the entire Donbas to Russia, including territories it does not currently control. Ukraine must also give up its weapons and cut its army in half. The Kremlin refused to confirm the authenticity of the peace plan for Ukraine. A corresponding statement was made by the spokesperson for the President of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Peskov.
In this particular case, we actually have no real innovations beyond what we truly call the unique spirit of anchorage. We have no new developments.
Soon after, Peskov stated that Moscow had not yet been informed of Ukraine's agreement to negotiate according to Trump's peace plan. Ukraine is ready to engage constructively in working on the peace plan it received from the American side. However, the state has outlined clear red lines regarding the country's territorial integrity and sovereignty. This was stated by Kristina Hayavyshin, Deputy Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the UN during a meeting of the UN Security Council.
First of all, while Ukraine is ready for constructive negotiations aimed at ending the war, including at the level of our leaders, our red lines are clear and unshakable. We will never recognize, either unofficially or in any other way, the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine by the Russian Federation as Russian.
Gayavyshin added that Ukrainian land is not for sale, so Ukraine will not agree to any restrictions on its right to self-defense or on the size and capabilities of its armed forces.
We will also not tolerate any encroachments on our sovereignty, including our sovereign right to choose the alliances we seek to join. Any genuine peace process must uphold the fundamental principle of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, nothing about Europe without Europe. And let me be just as clear. We will not reward the genocidal intent underlying Russian aggression by undermining our identity, in particular our language.
The Deputy Permanent Representative also noted that achieving peace requires increasing both financial and military assistance to Ukraine.
Strengthening Ukraine's defense capabilities is not an escalation. It is the only way to compel Russia to participate constructively in international peacekeeping efforts.
Kyiv emphasized that the Putin regime will not stop unless pressure is applied to it. Earlier, the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that in 1991, the Russian Federation unilaterally imposed its membership in the United Nations and usurped the USSR's seat on the Security Council. As the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs emphasizes, Moscow took the seat of a permanent member of the UN Security Council, bypassing the necessary procedures solely on the basis of a letter from then Russian President Boris Yeltsin. At the same time, the UN Charter does not mention the Russian Federation, nor does Article 13 of the Charter, which lists the permanent members of the Security Council.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy discussed the peace plan with European leaders. The head of state held a phone conversation with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, French President Emmanuel Macron, and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Zelenskyy stated that work is underway on a document prepared by the administration of US President Donald Trump. According to him, this should be a plan that ensures a just peace. The Telegraph reports that the United Kingdom will offer Ukraine NATO-style security guarantees as part of Trump's plan. The day before, Axios reported on this, citing a draft agreement. According to this provision, any future deliberate armed attack by Russia on Ukraine will be considered an attack threatening the peace and security of the transatlantic community. This means that the US and its allies will respond accordingly, including the use of military force. Volodymyr Zelenskyy recorded a video address to the people of Ukraine. He stated that this is currently one of the most difficult moments in Ukrainian history.
Right now, the pressure on Ukraine is among the heaviest it has ever faced. At this moment, Ukraine may be facing a very difficult choice. Either the loss of dignity or the risk of losing a key partner. Either the difficult 28 points or a harsh winter.
Zelenskyy noted that Ukraine is expected to respond. However, according to him, he already gave his answer back in 2019 during his oath of allegiance to Ukraine, when he pledged to defend its sovereignty and independence
Of the country. The national Ukrainian interest must be taken into account. We are not making any loud statements. We will calmly work with America and all our partners.
Zelenskyy emphasized that he will do everything possible to ensure that the war comes to an end as a result. The press secretary of the Russian dictator Dmitry Peskov uses threats and intimidation to pressure Kyiv into negotiations on terms favorable only to the Kremlin. In particular, the representative of the aggressor country stated that continuing the war is dangerous for Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Ukraine. In this case, the Russian army would allegedly seize even more territory. Peskov is trying to threaten, implying that the issue needs to be resolved right now. Peskov's statements appeared after reports that the occupying forces had allegedly captured the Ukrainian city of Kupiansk. On November 20th, the chief of the aggressor country's general staff, Valery Gerasimov, fabricated a story about the encirclement of 15 Ukrainian armed forces battalions during a report to the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. In addition, he also reported the alleged capture of Yampol in the Donetsk region. Gerasimov's statement was refuted by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. On the agency's Facebook page, it was stated that the leadership of the aggressor country continues to invent cheap informational provocations. The General Staff reports that Kupiansk is under the control of Ukraine's defense forces.
Counter-sabotage operations and special actions to search for and eliminate enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups are ongoing in the city and its surroundings. A similar situation is unfolding in Yampol as well. Search and strike operations by our troops continue in the area of the settlement.
The claim about the alleged capture of 80% of the city of Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region and 70% of Pokrovsk is also not true. The General Staff recalled that similar statements about the capture of Kupiansk and Pokrovsk were made as far back as a month ago. The agency writes that yet another lie from the Russian General Staff is aimed solely at concealing the critical losses of the Russian army. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy held a joint phone conversation with French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. The President's office reported that the leaders discussed a draft peace plan to end the war in Ukraine.
More than 600 Russian tourists have been stranded on a cruise ship off the coast of Turkey. The vessel has not been allowed to enter the port of Istanbul following the recent refusal by the authorities of Krasnodar Krai in the Russian Federation to accept the Turkish ferry sea bridge in Sochi. On board the Russian liner are residents of Krasnodar Krai, Moscow, and Leningrad regions of the Russian Federation. The liner is anchored. Earlier, the Russians did not allow the Turkish ferry to enter Sochi.
We are on the Trabzon-Sochi ferry. We arrived at the port of Sochi on November 6th at 9 a.m. and have been on the water for 3 days. We are staying in one place and there is no information at all.
The ferry was never allowed to dock and it was forced to return to Turkey. Earlier, it became known that Russians have started traveling to Turkey less frequently. The main reason for the decline in interest has been a significant increase in prices for vacations. In addition, Russian citizens have faced problems obtaining or renewing tourist residence permits in Turkey. 90% of applicants were denied according to the Moscow Times. It was also reported that Russians are leaving Turkey en masse due to the authorities' refusal to extend residence permits, as well as rising prices for renting and buying real estate. Russian tourists have also faced difficulties making payments while vacationing in Turkey because Russian cards have been blocked. Citizens of the Russian Federation abroad often shock others with their rude behavior. When checking out of the hotel, the Russians decided to steal about 35 kilograms of various foods and bath supplies. At that moment, they were literally caught red-handed. The Russians claimed that they supposedly hadn't stolen anything but just wanted to take a few treats with them for the road.